So, Kirby has a lot of friends. A few of them are close friends, others are best friends, normal friends, and acquaintances? What is a friend though? They're supposed to be your trustworthy pal, a person that you can identify as being in your safe zone, not a person that wants to kill you, right? Not all friends are made mutually with hugs and kisses placed at the top. Some friends may have originated from hostile encounters. They could have very well been your enemies before. This happens a lot to Kirby. Many of his past experiences with his companions were usually when they were his enemies. Typically this would be when they had first met one another. There had been times where Kirby and his enemies eventually approached some mutual ground even though they had hurt each other. However, a few of Kirby's dream friends don't really seem like they approached barely any reformation. In fact, it's not even necessarily them having a particular aggression with Kirby. Overall, it's their own straight up antagonism that they still possess. And no, we're not talking about the dream friends Marks and Dark Meta Knight. It's not them two, who are really still evil. But we're talking about Wave 3, the people that are canonically and presently Kirby's acquaintances and are supposedly good guys now. Now, just to get this out of the way, Dream Friends as a whole aren't canon. They're just not. The developers stated that they were previously going to add in Drasha, literally Drasha, even Galactonite, who is the same exact person you later fight as a boss. The developers had so much leniency when adding Dream Friends that they were going to add in final bosses or main villains. That's like having the Crodius Nightmare or Dark Crafter as a Dream Friend. The reason why they were so lenient with these choices were not because of story or consistency, but rather just for DLC, better gameplay, and nostalgic purposes. But anyways, Wave 3, Magolor, Taranza, and Susie, the characters that are actually currently connected with Kirby unlike Marks and Dark Meta Knight. In their debut games, they supposedly befriended Kirby at the end and turned good, or have they really? There are many sketchy areas that aren't touched upon, but let's get into it, starting with Magolor, the first one in Wave 3. In contrast from Taranza and Susie, he was a character that directly antagonized Kirby as a final boss. He chose to terrorize Kirby's home planet out of sheer sadism despite Kirby helping him previously. In fact, he did that spitefully because he was actually going to conquer all of the universe, but he chose to do his planet first. Before all of that, however, he arrived to Popstar playing victim. He was in bad condition when he appeared, though he never truthfully revealed yet why he was, so playing victim he was able to gain Kirby's trust. In advance, Magolor had already known about him and his plan before he arrived, as he directly mentions that later on. He expected Kirby to help him. Even though he was manipulating him and his friends, he really did secretly appreciate the help on repairing his all-powerful vehicle, which would allow him to go back to his home world even though it was solely for malicious intent. He still was sent around his overall evil plan, even attempting to murder Kirby and his friends for resisting his tyrannical measures. So Magolor was a pretty malicious and petty individual, using others for his own gain and then completely apathetically stabbing them in the back. Not to mention, Magolor emphasizes his betrayal to Kirby and his friends even more by portraying them as ignorant from the irony of their own naive, non-judgmental friendliness towards him when he was actually just playing them all along. After an intense battle, he was taken down by the very people who had once trusted him. Magolor began to see the flaws and ignorance in his own ways, because during that moment of defeat, he experienced a drastic sequence that would change his life forever. Out of all the things he predicted and planned out, Magolor did not foresee that he would be taken down by Kirby and his friends. On top of that, he didn't know his place. The very power source that he was after also seems to betray him. The sentient Master Clown unleashes undying pain and suffering upon Magolor as it manifests a grotesque form on his body. His body now being strained, butchered, and feasted away by the Crown's possession. During this moment, Magolor has no process of thought. From what it seems, this is his own comeuppance for committing his previous actions. Magolor now sees this as his punishment, because he knows that there is no way out of this. He will soon die painfully from this crown. At this point, he pleads for all of this wretched torture to end. It does eventually, and he just floats there, fatigued and exhausted. The last thing he can see within his glimpse is Kirby and his friends. The very people he backstabbed when they did nothing but help him out of goodwill. And then Magolor fades away. Next thing you know, Magolor miraculously appears in a separate dimension. Given what happened prior, he sees this as an uncertain revival, as a second chance in life. Maybe now he could change his ways. All he could do now is beg for forgiveness and apologize to those that helped free him. Magolor once again arrives back to Popstar, but not injured, not as a manipulator, but as a friend. Now Magolor is reformed. Now he is best friends forever. Or is he? Yes, you see, this was a completely traumatic experience for Magolor. This was the worst possession someone could ever go through in the Kirby games. If the Master Crown wasn't destroyed, Magolor would have certainly died. His arc is over. He received his comeuppance, learned from it, and received a second chance. However, while the plot goes to show that he's reformed, the game itself isn't entirely convinced, which is kind of sketchy. Kirby Star Allies says this about Magolor: he's best friends forever, which seems drastically out of touch to name him. It also says, is it possible that he could end up becoming a true friend? Is he not already a true friend after all that happened? He should be better now, right? Now this all leads into Magolor's background. We don't know any of his background. In fact, we don't exactly know who Magolor is. Where did his plans of universal conquest stem from? How does Magolor know of the Ancients' creations? Okay, there's something he's not telling us. He may be our friend, but as he says, he at one point was around individuals who were our enemies before. In fact, Magolor had already known about us before he even met us, which would imply that someone we have fought before has told our business and whereabouts to Magolor, which would then lead him to drive out his scheme. Point being is, Magolor is still pretty suspicious. He may be reformed and changed his lifestyle, but he still knows a lot of what we don't know. He still came from that area. Lots of things that Magolor could possibly know is something that we probably need to know. It's possible that he's most likely not telling us out of fear, because if we're being real, this probably wasn't the first time he attempted to attain immeasurable power for malevolent purposes. Really, the reason why all these events happened was all because Magolor lost the first time he engaged Landia. Even now, we don't know if he could still be planning something, which is probably the reason why these pause screens talk of Magolor as if he's not our actual friend. Is he a true friend? You wouldn't want him as an enemy. True friends would not hide anything to their friends. In this case, it would be Magolor not hiding info of other dangerous entities out there that would be an immense threat in the future. And my personal favorite one. Is he your ally, or is he all lies? And yes, that's where the title of the video came from. Now Taranza, arguably the person who hasn't really committed anything too crazy compared to his peers in Wave 3, he's arguably the nicest one there. As of now, currently, he's just a man in search of a significant other. Going to his past, however, he was an underling that was ordered by the monarchical Queen Sectonia to abduct the hero of the lower world so they could be used to conquer that world. However, this didn't really plan out as he expected it to, which then led him to be thrown away into the abyss by Queen Sectonia. Queen Sectonia was a ruthless tyrant that terrorized the people of the sky by overruling them. She imprisoned the citizens and used them for her overall plan that would only fulfill her own desires. Taranza was unfortunately put into a position where he had no other choice but to work for her. However, at one point, Taranza and Sectonia were extremely close friends. Sectonia was just a normal, innocent girl at the time. Her and Taranza were just in Youth, so when Sectonia changed into this narcissistic, cold-hearted queen, it must have drastically affected Taranza. Also of the matter that he was pressured and basically forced to work under her, committing twisted and inhumane acts at her behest. So it would make sense that now, he's more civilized because he's putting all that behind him. However, one thing that is concerning and a bit unsettling, while he in himself is moral, his darker version of himself shows a different, unexpected spectrum of emotions. Dark Taranza from the Mirror World. Now, the Mirror Dimension is supposed to take your inner badness and bring it to life within the Mirror World. In this case, Dark Taranza seems to be more sinister and sadistic. Okay, so Taranza and Sectonia species have these frightening abilities where they can leech power from another until they're weak enough to be controlled. This was how Taranza was able to control DDD and amplify his aggression. This was also most likely the way Sectonia rose to power so indefinitely. So why would Taranza have a more sadistic side of him? Okay, so listen now. This is what I think. This is how all the events of Triple Deluxe were caused. This is in no way canon, but I believe this is what most likely occurred. Taranza and Sectonia were the last of their own species. This makes sense since we don't see no other of their kind at all in Floralia. Now, this would happen when Sectonia and Taranza were still close, back when Sectonia wasn't corrupt. The people of the sky admired and acclaimed them to since they were the only ones of their species that used their vicious powers responsibly and not to harm anyone. The rest of their kind were immediately gotten rid of, for they were complete savages when using their powers. This would then proceed to Sectonia's election as queen, for she didn't use her powers against anyone. However, this immediately backfired. Queen Sectonia then brutally oppressed the people of the sky for her own desires. Considering her closest friend was Taranza, she made him her personal henchman, especially since he also possesses the same powers she does, which would make him the primary person to carry out all of her orders. So this further implies that Taranza was the one who mostly assaulted the people of the sky. But going back into Dark Taranza, why would he be completely sinister? We know that regular Taranza didn't want to hurt anyone. He was just following orders. He was forced. Well, maybe he did enjoy terrorizing the citizens. In fact, Taranza himself actually does show some of his sadistic side in Triple Deluxe. Just look at what he says right here. The people of this land thought they were clever. They thought they could use their dreamstalk to save their world. But I saw right through their plan. Right here, Taranza snickers. Now actually think about this. The people of the sky have been oppressed and maltreated for endless years, and they basically use the dreamstalk as a cry for help. Taranza over here is literally scoffing at their last desperation for hope. Furthermore, he's laughing because he managed to decline their desperate attempts. That is pretty sadistic. But why would Taranza do this? Why would he feel this way? He wasn't corrupted, he was pressured to do this. Well, first we need to know more about Taranza. The only other significant things we see about him is his feelings. More so, his feelings towards Sectonia. At the end of Triple Deluxe, once Taranza realized that there was a chance to stop Sectonia, he attempted to contribute putting an end to her. After her death, it's shown that Taranza really laments over her passing. He is truly grieving that he never got a chance to see or say goodbye to the real Sectonia, and he never even managed to confess his true feelings to her or save her when she was at her most corrupt. But in a separate non-canon storyline, he actually attempts to save her, but he's trying to save her after she has already passed, meaning he can't let it go. He can't let her go. He then commits radical actions such as trying to summon a completely different version of her from the Dark Mirror. Possibly already knowing the dangers of using the Dark Mirror, he himself inadvertently puts him and everyone else in danger by releasing an insane amount of evil creatures from the mirror. All of this only to find out that Sectonia still wasn't able to be brought back. According to Kirby's Star Allies, deep down inside he knows Sectonia can't really be revived, but he still somewhat believes that she can out of sheer desperation. This citation from Team Kirby Clash explains everything. A flask that resembles the puppeteer magician. It is said that his feelings never touched the queen he served. Taranza was really desperate for her. Him witnessing Sectonia becoming more colder must have really appalled him. He possibly could have brought her back to her senses, but it eventually came too late. She was brought about as queen and had complete control over the country. On that hand, Taranza was forced to serve under her. He may have possibly made some attempts to wake her up, but they were futile. where she can no longer hear anyone else's voice. At that point, she was so distant from him that he couldn't even speak to her. She may have even threatened to kill him at one point because he was intervening too much. So instead, over time, Taranza settled and accepted this fate. He would then gradually become more sinister and violent, not to serve her, not to fulfill her desires, but just for recognition, all to try to connect to her. And since he couldn't, he decided to take a lot of his anger and misery on the poor citizens. But nonetheless, he was never able to truly blend with her, and so she died. The very moment after he pleaded to her for help, only to then get blasted off into the abyss by her, was when he finally gave up. He knew that it was over a long time ago, and there was no use trying to connect to her anymore. So in the end, he had to be the one to try and put her to her own end for good. So Taranza had experienced a lot of things. All those dreadful acts that he did out of desperation and anger were all put to waste. He knew that Sectonia had to be stopped because she was never going to stop. Now he is put through the guilt of being one of the ones responsible for his own love interest's death. The person responsible for terrorizing innocent people. All of that is on him. Well, at least he's willing to move on, but Sectonia will always stay in his heart. Who knows what big actions Taranza will do next. He at this point now is a grieving, mentally broken offender that is roaming through the skies. He would think that he hates the world and everything around him. That's what usually happens when you lose a loved one, especially in such unpredictability. You become unstable and keep asking why and why such things would happen, eventually showing contempt for the world itself. Taranza might be the nicest one in Wave 3, but he's also the most unpredictable. Now Susie. There's a reason why she was saved for last. Susie's story is the closest to realism out of all the others in Kirby. Though there's not much realism in Kirby to begin with, whereas people could be turned bad just by looking at mirrors. Well then again, social media exists, so that's probably not too far. Anyways, Susie. Susie is the daughter of Haltman, President Max Prophet Haltman, the president of a trillion-dollar corporation that funds off of mechanizing planets for their resources. Haltman himself is a very ambitious, technologically advanced person that dwells in much luxuriance due to his inventions and the foundings of his company. His inventions put him towards the direction of his newfound company to attain and collect such rich resources from distant areas. Gathering such resources would excel the company's profit and status. Susie, or Susanna Patra Haltman, was raised traveling the universe with her father, learning from his ambition. Haltman was a caring, cool-headed family man that loved his daughter more than anything. That, however, was until a horrible accident happened. During an experiment with a technologically advanced supercomputer that was viewed as the future of the company, Susie was inadvertently transported away into another dimension. Haltman, believing that she was dead, attempted to reactivate the computer in hopes of bringing his daughter back. Now yes, this doesn't seem that realistic via Susie getting transported away into a separate dimension, but the overall context of this matter can still be seen as real. You're a small child with your father, just you and him on a camping trip. But some vicious animal like a bear forced you two to separate. Your father is holding off this vicious predator, and he shouts at you to run away. He tells you that he will eventually catch up to you. You run as far away as you can with no sense of direction. You're now only deeper in the wilderness, lost, alone as a young child, and you don't see him again. You cry and pray that you will eventually see your dad again, surrounded by nothing but harsh, unpredictable environments, only having a scarce amount of resources. The realization of you getting slaughtered and eaten alive at any moment doesn't delay. Many long, enduring, painful years pass by. Now you're in your early 20s. You manage to sustain and hold on to yourself in a hazardous desolation filled with predators. All you can think about after being trapped for so long in the wilderness is your dad back home. A miracle happens. You barely escape with just your life and figure out your direction home. Later on, your home is within your reach, your grasp. Knowing your father is still there, mourning that his poor child has passed away long ago, you expect open arms. You bust in the door and yell, "Dad." You get no response. Well, you do, but it's not one that should have happened. The man turns towards you, and his already hardened expression turns into a complete look of contempt. Instead of a father breaking out into tears, it's a man that looks at you with utmost pity. Each time you say that you're his supposed child, he looks at you with even more disgust. At one point, if not already, you look like nothing but a complete lunatic. He scornfully demands that you leave his sight. You are not his daughter. He has never seen you before ever in his life. So what is wrong with you? That isn't your dad. Have you went insane? No, no, this isn't happening, you say. My entire life did not come to this moment only to be completely dismissed. This isn't real, this isn't real, this can't be real. How could my own dad not recognize me? Thrown away into the abyss, seemingly yet again. You are in a daze. You don't know what to think. You need answers. None of this is right. You return back to this man, apologizing for what had happened earlier. You plead for a job in response. Despite your previous appearance, he seems to have a different impression of you after a few chores that you did. You could serve as a good asset. After a couple of days staying with this person, you realize that this man can't possibly be your dad. It's just unreal. This man is nothing but a psychotic, self-obsessed madman that is only immersed with his own company. What is going on? This is Susie's life story. As a little girl, she was accidentally teleported into another dimension filled with wild, ravenous creatures, all only to find out that her used-to-be loving father can't even recognize her for some absent reason that can't be explained. It's not like she can speak up about it. She'll be viewed as a delusional lunatic towards Holtman, which would then cause her to be separated by her dad once more, since he would likely fire her on the spot. So just like Taranza, she was forced to serve under somebody who was at one point close with. But whereas Taranza tried to get recognition from his loved one, Susie did not. Note that Taranza and Susie both came from similar grounds when it came to their loved ones, but they both had different responses, mostly because they had different standpoints. While Taranza was pressured and forced to submit to Sectonia's drastic change, he still attempted to connect to her out of desperation. Not as to say that he was just doing that because he wanted her, but to also do it so she doesn't lose herself and harm innocent people. But considering that it came too late to reach her ears, as a last resort he chose to submit into her tyranny, and so he became a pathetic follower just so she could acknowledge his existence. Susie, on the other hand, doesn't further attempt to connect to Holtman because she already knows that he somehow can't remember her. This would also be out of fear that Holtman would immediately fire her, eliminating her only chance. Remember, Sectonia didn't lose her memory as bad as Holtman did. She was still somewhat able to recognize Taranza. Her narcissism just overshadowed any kind of empathy that she may have had previously with Taranza. Holtman just straight up in his perspective has never met Susie. Holtman, however, noticed a familiar spark within Susie when they first met. So Susie in response does things differently. This is where her antagonism comes into play. Mr. Holtman came from a wealthy background, and as a young man he was bringing about his company, the Holtman Works Company, which is reliant on stealing rich and natural resources from unsuspecting planets and using for the company's own economic benefit. Sure, it can be argued that he only started these corrupt activities because he was losing his memory from the mother computer, which is what made him a cold-hearted person in the first place. However, notice that Susie's accident was all because of Stardream, the mother computer. It's very questionable as to why they were tampering with Stardream in the first place. I remember after that happened, that's when Holtman decided to reactivate Stardream solely for his own daughter, but since he messed with the interface too much, he lost his memory and became naturally corrupt by his own pride that was left over. But we'll get back to all that later on. Max Holtman began to view inhabitants of planets as nothing but filthy, uncivilized creatures that shouldn't deserve such habitable environments. So out of sheer greediness for his own company's extremely needless, selfish goals, he continued to spitefully invade and steal resources from innocent bystanders. Now, one would think that Susie is in complete dispute of her father's measures, but no. Just like him, she also scorns about natives. In fact, she actually goes on about it right in front of a native's face, even insulting him on top of that. So, what does this mean? Is she completely acting this way as a persona so she could continue to be close to her father and keep a roof over her head? It should be noted that Susie's home is most likely her workplace. Most importantly, HWC seems solely based on business travel. They're traveling the universe essentially. So if Susie were to get fired from Holtman, which wouldn't be out of place for him since he still owns the company and has been on it before she even arrived, Susie wouldn't have a place to stay, and given the conditions she was previously in, she wouldn't have knowledge of how to live on her own. She needs him more than he needs her. But it turns out, Susie this whole time has this secret hidden plan. She was waiting for the exact moment for Holtman to reactivate Stardream using the interface. It was then she swiped it away at the last moment, deciding that she was actually going to use it, also saying that she thought this day would never come. Now, this is where things get weird. Susie says in the Japanese version that she wanted Holtman to wake up with tears in his eyes. So, does this mean that Susie automatically assumed that the mother computer was involved with Holtman's memory loss? Which would actually make sense since it was also the one that transported her away. This would also explain if she truly did attend that persona just to stick with her dad in the company, and for her plan to pan out. But here's a question. What exactly was she going to do with the interface? She apparently says that some startup company will pay top dollar for this, and then attempts to control Stardream's database. So, if Stardream never absorbed Holtman's mind and Holtman woke up as the once caring father that she knew, what would have happened after that? Was everyone just going to forget about everything and go home? No, right? So, if Susie's main purpose was to get her father back this entire time, and apparently sell the super dangerous, sentient, all-powerful supercomputer just to some random company that would be so unsuspectful of Stardream's true unhindering hazard just for more money, what does that make her? The same accident that happened to her and her father could happen to anyone else. Yet Susie is willing to allow that to possibly happen to another person? Another thing, if she was going to control Stardream, wouldn't that mean she would have tried to kill Kirby? You know, cause he's still a filthy native. I mean, first off, she was in complete utter shock that Kirby managed to defeat one of the machines manufactured by the mother computer, in which she believed would never lose. This meaning that she was fully intent on initiating Kirby's death. Not to mention she immediately resorts to try and kill Kirby herself since, once again, the nearly perfect machine that was sure to win failed. And this happened only a few minutes before she had a program controller. Considering Holtman also didn't manage to defeat him when he was the one that outright told Susie to not strike back, it would make sense as to why she would use Stardream to exterminate Kirby. Now think about it, Susie's plan was never purely dependent on Kirby, or anyone else interfering. The only time she was reliant on Kirby was when Stardream awakened as a killing machine. In that case, she only used him because things were out of her control since her plan failed. And Stardream was literally going to eradicate everything in the universe, so Holtman was going to eventually use the program controller to control Stardream anyways, so these same events would have still happened. Susie was going to bring her dad back, sell Stardream so nothing else would ever happen between them two, and most likely continue the company's goals, which would still be mechanizing planets. This is what Holtman would proceed to do, right? Because that's what the goal has always been. Nothing really has changed. Holtman just became a lot more discriminative and started enforcing complete utter genocide upon natives. Susie probably saw this as an unjustification from her father, whereas she would most likely prefer to steal all of their resources and then just leave them there. After all, this was probably what they were doing before Holtman made that sudden change. Not to say that it was good, they're still stealing resources from innocent bystanders, but this question still stands. Why would Susie still have the same views as her father, who isn't actually her caring father in the past? Unless Holtman has always had these views. Only now, his views extended drastically because of his memory loss. This all goes back to where they first had Stardream. You know, back when Susie and Holtman were both younger and supposedly not corrupt. Back when Holtman was still a caring father. It's very questionable as to why they had a mother computer in the first place and for this long in the company. Well, a statement coming from Stardream itself actually answers this. The goal of this company has always been prosperity. This is what Stardream states after it observes Holtman's mind and body. So this would conclude that Max has always had this objective. This would make sense since he had always been engrossed within this company even when his daughter was still around. It wasn't until he lost her and then he focused even more on his company, sheerly to wish his daughter back. That is why he later on obtained the Nova, but that was short-lived. He eventually lost himself, which would then bring him back to his former goal, infinite prosperity. Now, you could argue that Haltman wanting success for his company isn't really selfish, but then again, what does HWC mainly do? Mechanize planets. They're still capturing precious resources from all life and leaving behind waste. All to push the Haltman Works Company as the most technologically advanced company in the universe. This fits well into why Max has Stardream in his possession. Stardream was crafted by an even more advanced civilization that existed in the past, who also had a large influence over the universe. Stardream is constantly proclaimed as the most powerful machine in existence. It wouldn't be a surprise that Haltman, even since the beginning, was using Stardream for absolute domination over the entire universe. Once again, that had always been the goal: infinite prosperity. Stardream never stated that the goal had ever changed throughout the years. HWC had always strived to be the most advanced force that leeches on all habitable planets and make it its domain in the universe. This would support as to why Susie would always have this stigmatic view of natives. She came from the most top grand society that forcibly takes away from the low class out of pure selfishness. Just because Haltman was a caring father doesn't mean he still couldn't be a prideful, selfish man. After all, when he was younger, he was surrounded in wealth and was in the process of taking over planets. Susie, as a little girl, would follow his footsteps because that's her father. She was raised in that same wealthy lifestyle of taking from those that were below her. So essentially, she grew to be just like her father. Both of them were like this ever since the beginning. When Susie was sent to another dimension, she was in the midst of barren wastelands filled with dangerous primitive wildlife, which would, in her perspective, back up the reasons for her overall prejudiceness towards natives, especially since she holds a higher status ground and resides in a much more modern, concentrated area. She views natives as inferior, uncultivated creatures that should hold no opposition of their submission to those that tyrannize them. She's really no different than her father. She scorns innocent inhabitants, claiming that they take their own natural resources for granted, probably because Susie, coming from an advanced civilization, sees that more can be done with those resources. So, believing in her supremacy, she is highly involved with stealing those resources because apparently the indigenous creatures don't deserve the very things they need to survive? All because they're not capable of further advancing their resources, so they should just have it completely taken away from them. All of this only to be used by a corrupt, power-hungry corporation that Susie herself resides in and has way more resources than they need, and to use it just for their own needless, selfish personal gains. She is also the main commander of the invader army, meaning that she directly conquers and violates her victims. After all, she was the one bragging and giggling about how she ambushed Meta Knight and crumpled him into a mere usable puppet. She possesses an absolutely prejudiced view of natives for attempting retaliation for their own home world. Not to mention she was going to sell a highly dangerous, powerful entity that has harmed her and her father in the past to another unsuspecting business. Mind you, which was supposed to originally be the future of their own business. It was only when that situation made a complete unexpected turn for the worse, which would have affected everyone, which led Susie to essentially use Kirby as a reliability, even though a few minutes prior, she was going to kill that same person. Notice the difference? Magolor and Taranza at least somewhat made up for their actions because they realized that what they were doing was wrong. Susie never did. She wanted Stardream for herself and wanted the company to continue. It's not like she changed her views or ways. Only when things got out of her own control was when she asked Kirby for help. In fact, right after Kirby destroys Stardream, she straight up just leaves, without a trace. She doesn't stay or attempt to save anyone, she looks on and leaves, and it's never revealed where she went. At least with Magolor, we know that he's either still on Popstar or he's in another dimension, and with Taranza, he's in the sky searching for a significant partner. So what happened to Susie? Well, Star Ally says that she's apparently bringing the Haltman Works Company back, and she's still mechanizing planets. This brings numerous issues. Many solar systems would be in fear of that name, so they would instantly strike back out of fear. However, the Japanese version states that Susie, allegedly, is providing happy lives and family harmony with the power of science, and under such a philosophy will exterminate the savages. Which seems really absurd since this implies that Susie has made a complete turn when she actually hasn't. You see, this excerpt would still prove that she still has a low view on savages, despite the fact that HWC was savagely storming all over them in the first place. Also, Susie has learned absolutely nothing from her previous experiences. First off, she never had a problem with ruthlessly dominating over multiple planets. In fact, she supported it. All she really cared about was how her amnesiac father was obsessed with Stardream, the very thing that harmed and separated them two, which is why she had hidden plans of bringing his memory back and selling it. Susie would have no reason to have any sort of compassion for Kirby or any other native. She directly assaulted and even attempted to kill them herself. It's not like Kirby stopping Stardream changed Susie at all. After all, her original plan was to only bring her father back and remove Stardream from their life. And if this did happen, then she would have still continued hurting people. How do we know? She literally was going to sell Stardream, who was still very dangerous and powerful. She was going to sell it to other individuals whether they were going to use it maliciously or not. The same horrible things that happened to her and her dad could happen to them. Nothing has ever changed about Susie. She still has no care for anyone but herself and her dad. After all, they are still superior to everyone. You could argue that she found faith in natives because of Kirby and Meta Knight's companionship of taking out Stardream. This is in contrast with Holtman and Susie's distant, self-absorbed relationship, which led to Stardream killing Holtman. This would support as to why Susie would want to unite people in harmony so savages wouldn't be born. After all, she would see her dad as a savage himself after seeing how distant and insane he became, and due to that, things turned to the worse for him. But given Susie's stubborn attitude and personality, she would probably see her dad's misfortunes as entirely Stardream's fault, and to be fair, it was. He became a madman because of the machine. Holtman and Susie, and even the company, would have been just fine without Stardream. They still would have elite control over everything. Their pride and supremacy would not ever be stopped. Also, to be fair, it might have been possible that Holtman would have been able to control Stardream if Susie never interfered. Once again, Susie would probably see this and stubbornly not put both of their own ego at fault. She would just put Stardream at fault. After all, both of them are very self-conceited. Susie's demeanor is far from redemption as of now. Even though she would probably learn after her entire life was built up to bringing her father back, only to be completely reverted twice. It still wouldn't be a surprise that her egotistical self would stubbornly overlook and neglect this. Even now, it seems like she is neglecting and overlooking something that is extremely important. Grief. Her grief over her father's utter bleak death. Has Susie ever shown lament or sorrow over her dear father? Taranza and Magolor show regret and grief, but Susie doesn't. In fact, what does she do right after her father perishes? She straight up leaves and becomes dedicated to bringing his company back. Kinda like how when her dad first lost her. Whether Susie is helping people now or still stealing from others, she still may not have truly accepted her father's passing. Maybe because the cold-hearted man that did die wasn't the loving, tender-hearted father that she remembered so long ago. She may be ignoring it, but deep down inside she knows that every last trace of her father that could have been brought back is completely erased now. Also of the matter that Susie deep down inside would blame herself for all that has happened. She may blame Stardream on the outside, but she would also blame herself. If she was never lost, then everything that happened over the years wouldn't have occurred. Susie has never went through the stages of grief, while Taranza has went through denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Susie is just turning a blind eye and putting all of her focus and thoughts on a recently declined company that she has to work even harder for to bring back. This is not healthy. If anything, this just seems to be a coping mechanism. Many people in real life have attempted to overshadow their mourns just by continuously working, ignoring their sorrows, and pretending those sorrows don't exist. They do this either to try blindly coping with their loss, or to not naturally deal with the overwhelming pain of grief, or just not having the time to truly grieve. All of these ultimately end in explosive behavior. Also, Susie has never really had much of a life. Most of her good memories may have just been childhood memories, which again is just mostly time spent with her father. As a broken, sad little girl that was just separated from everything she's ever loved, now has to constantly strive and hold on to life in a completely different, colossal and catastrophic environment. And she's dealt with this for constant, continuous years. All just to return home and see her precious daddy, only to find out that the man has completely changed and doesn't even remember her. Even when she's returned home, it seems that Susie has never really experienced life to its fullest, even though she lives in the highest order. Remember, she's there solely just to be close to her father, who was just completely neglecting her after all those years, and she's still doing labor as a secretary and a commander. Her only hobbies to what it seems is doing karaoke, which again is ultimately overshadowed by her father because of that narcissistic company song that is all about him. She also says that she apparently loves singing in that song. This is either out of nostalgia or just to cope, so she can't even do her hobbies without thinking the worst. However, she does have another plan, which is actually barely any different from her objective that she's had almost her entire life, which is to bring her dad back. And to do that, she has to wait for the very object that caused all this endless suffering to her and her dad to be reactivated by him so his memories can swarm back. By the way, it's stated that the Holodoomers and all those other creatures was actually data collected by Holman himself. If Susie saw this, which she most likely did, she would first off instantly have a PTSD flashback of those predators, and then realize that her father was that close to finding her during all of those years. It would also give her the thought that he was actually trying to look for her. It wouldn't be a surprise if Susie just straight up broke down when she saw that. But then again, she really can't, because she's a top secretary and she's supposed to be dignified, right? So she has to bottle up all of those emotions. Once Susie finally snatched the interface away from Holman, she giggles in joy. Given that she says she thought this day would never come, that would mean that she had been enduring and waiting for a long time, much similar to how she had to endure in all of her adolescence. Her entire life has been building up to this moment. Everything she has ever strived for in her traumatic, broken life is all for this moment. All for her to finally see her daddy again. And what happens? It explodes right in her face. Everything that she has ever dreamed for, ironically, which wasn't even a selfish dream, all of it is blown up in her face. Once again, the very thing that had caused harm to her family, even years later, is still making it crumble. Her father is shredded from existence. Both of them were never even able to say goodbye. Currently trying to bottle all that in and completely ignoring it, she tries to bring back his same company for questionable reasons. Even after all of her life, she is still forced to be completely separated from her beloved parent, and is still put in a position of constant labor because all of her life has been completely meaningless. In all honesty, Susie needs to have some time with the Mage Sisters, a trio that is also in Wave 3. People usually put her with Taranza and even Magolor, but no, she needs to be specifically with them. They were ones that also came from a corruptive and abusive father that at one point used to fill them with ambition, much like Holtman. The sisters were then raised sheerly as weapons, but those sisters had each other. They looked out for each other. They would understand. They would understand what Susie would be going through. She could be their new sister. Susie has never had anyone in her life. Much like her dad, she also doesn't seem to work well with others. From what we see, she hates losing. That reminds me of someone. All this comes from her absolute superiority complex that engulfs her entirely. She always believes and calls herself to be seniority and giftfully adept, even though she knows deep down inside that she hates herself for everything that has happened. But it doesn't end there. There is another Susie. Parallel Susie from Super Kirby Clash is supposed to be regular Susie, but more progressed. She actually is very hostile. However, an important detail happens after she is defeated. Parallel Susie comes back, and is just sitting down, looking at the sky. This is something normal Susie has never done before. All she's done is constantly work and work, all mostly to survive, even as a child. She's never really rested and pondered. This could possibly be her actually mourning, right? All of these are something regular Susie hasn't done yet. But it's not over. Suddenly, another Susie comes into the mix, and this one is called President Parallel Susie. Presumably, this is her after she has brought back HWC, and she's actually stated by the developers to be a darker version of her former self. After President Susie's defeat, we actually never see her again. We still see normal parallel Susie. These Susies are likely supposed to represent foreshadows of our current Susie. If Susie settles down and finally lets her mind loosen, she'll save herself. But if she continues to devour herself into work, ignoring all of her personal problems, she will eventually mentally shatter and destroy herself. Because, once again, she's lived almost all of her life struggling and grasping for survival, only to realize that the only objective she had been desperately aiming for was all for naught. She, as of now, may be a corporate businesswoman soon to be president, but deep down inside, she's still that same little girl crying for daddy right before she was lost into the wilderness. Well, that turned really sad. Here's some Wave 3 pictures to cheer up your mood. Check out my Twitter if you want more of these.